There are mysteries in this world that mankind was never meant to solve. Some say it was forged in the heart of a volcano. Some say it fell from the sky the night the meteor struck ancient Mesoamerica. Some say it was crafted by a dark power older than the world itself. They say there are three pieces: a head, a body, a base. And when combined, they create something so powerful, so confounding, it has humbled every child who dared approach it. For generations, brave young warriors entered the hidden temple, only to be absolutely wrecked by this thing. But today, after decades of silence, I, your resident Average Joe, have uncovered the truth. A truth Nickelodeon tried to bury under 10,000 gallons of green slime. A truth so shocking, so devastating, that the silver monkey statue wasn't even that hard. It's 3 pieces, Chad. Come on, just 3. And somehow, this goofy little totem has traumatized more 90s kids than the government's food pyramid. Today, we're talking the glory, the weirdness, the slime-soaked chaos, and the absolute fever dream that was Nickelodeon in the 90s. A place where the rules didn't matter, adults were not in charge, and the greatest challenge of childhood was assembling a monkey statue under pressure. Roll that theme song. Hey, and welcome back to another mainline Monday edition of the Average Joe Nerdcast. I'm Nate, your nostalgia archaeologist, defender of Capri Suns, and a man who still believes the aggro crag was a legitimate athletic goal. Today we're diving headfirst into an ocean of orange splats and questionable 90s fashion choices. We're talking about the era when Nickelodeon wasn't just TV. It was an entire lifestyle. It was rebellion with training wheels. It was chaotic, good energy incarnate. It was the clubhouse we all hung out in, even though none of us actually knew anyone who had Nickelodeon Studios tickets. And if they did, they were basically royalty. But this episode isn't just nostalgia goggles and green slime, because for every Hey Arnold jazz riff or Stickly jingle we all loved, there were shadows behind the scenes. Kids pushed too hard, creators fighting executives, and one of the most powerful producers in children's TV history turning out to be, well, a whole lot of yikes. We are going to cover it all: the magic, the mess, the meteoric rise, and the slow corporate sanding down of what made Nickelodeon so special. But before the controversies, before SpongeBob dominance, before SNICK nights and campfire scares, we have to go back. Back before the orange couch, before the slime geysers, before the glowing green temple guards that haunted our nightmares. I'm talking all the way back to the beginning. So here's the thing most people do not realize. Nickelodeon wasn't born cool. It had to grow into the goblin child we all fell in love with. You see, in the beginning, and I mean the actual beginning, Nickelodeon was basically PBS with more beige. Just very polite children learning very polite lessons in very polite settings. It was like if a guidance counselor turned into an entire cable network. There was no slime, no chaos, no kids falling into foam pits or being chased by adult men dressed like angry Mayan landlords. Just Wholesome, safe, educational content. And kids? Yeah, we weren't exactly lining up to watch The Science of Tall Grass or whatever they were playing back then. Nickelodeon needed a personality transplant. Enter the slime. Originally invented for the Canadian show You Can't Do That on Television, slime was basically the perfect symbol of Nickelodeon's entire identity shift. A kid says, I don't know, slimed. Instant catharsis, instant rebellion, instant marketing icon. And you see, kids loved it because slime was everything adults hated. It was messy, it was unpredictable, it ruined carpets, it stained your shirts, and it made mom sigh in a way you can still hear if you close your eyes hard enough. Nickelodeon basically looked at every other kids' network of the time and said, oh, you want to be safe and educational? Cool, cool. We're going to launch children into foam pits and dump goo on their heads instead. This was a channel that recognized something revolutionary. Kids don't want perfection. They want personality. And personality? Nickelodeon had it in buckets. Slime buckets. And suddenly, the network was changing. Bumpers got weirder. Commercials got louder. The programming became a little more chaotic, a little more kid-coded, a little more, what if we did this but 10 times louder? Nickelodeon found its identity the moment it stopped trying to be a polite babysitter and embraced being the chaotic older cousin who introduces you to sugar, sarcasm, and the joy of staying up past 9 p.m. It was not polished. It wasn't calm. It wasn't designed by a committee of child development experts. It was loud. It was totally messy. It was neon, and it was all ours. And once the slime started flowing, once Nickelodeon realized kids wanted the chaos, wanted the noise, wanted to see other kids running wild on television, that's when everything cracked open. Because if you were a kid in the 90s, the moment the school bell rang, your brain did not go, oh boy, time to do homework. Absolutely not. Your brain went, can I make it home in time to watch other kids get launched onto a giant foam mountain while a grown man in a referee shirt shouts at them? Which brings us to one of the purest, highest octane, unfiltered doses of Nickelodeon energy ever put on television. The after-school game shows. And I'm not talking about little rinky-dink shows where kids win a sticker sheet and a pat on the head. No. Nickelodeon game shows were quests. They were trials of childhood athleticism and emotional fortitude. They were the Olympics of pure chaos. Double Dare, Guts, Global Guts, Legends of the Hidden Temple. This was the era when Nickelodeon said, hey, what if instead of telling kids to sit down and behave, we strap them into harnesses, catapult them across a studio, and see who survives? And that's where we're going to dive next, because you have not truly lived until you've watched a terrified 12-year-old try to assemble a monkey statue while being hunted by a man in cargo shorts. Because the second you walked in the door after school, shoes half off, backpack flung like you were trying to summon a demon of incomplete homework, Nickelodeon became the arena. You didn't warm up, you didn't stretch, you didn't even breathe half the time. You just turned on the TV and instantly fell into a world where kids your age were living out the physical fantasies you only acted out on the playground when no one was watching. And man, if Nickelodeon figured out one thing early, it was this. Kids love watching other kids almost eat pavement. And not in a malicious, haha, pain kind of way. Absolutely not. It was the thrill, the stakes. That tiny sliver of hope that maybe someday you could be the one that was up there on that stage. So let's start with the wildest one of them all. Double Dare was the gateway drug, the original hit. The moment Nickelodeon looked at all of children's programming and said, hey, what if we just made getting absolutely filthy a competitive sport? You see, this show made household chores look like Olympic events. You had families launching pies, sliding across inflatables, digging through nostrils the size of refrigerators, and diving face first into giant bowls of spaghetti like they were reenacting the world's messiest Lady and the Tramp. And the flags? Finding those stupid little red flags was the children's equivalent of treasure hunting for El Dorado. A kid would be halfway swallowed by a giant foam waffle, drowning in enough fake syrup to kill a diabetic grizzly bear, and Mark Summers would be cheerfully shouting, just a little deeper, feel around, you can do it! Meanwhile, their parents were trying not to cry on national television, and yet we all wanted to be those kids. The slime, the mess, the absolute absurdity. It wasn't gross to us, it was freedom. Because only on Nickelodeon was a kid allowed, no, encouraged, to trash the room and get cheered on for it. It was an anti-parent fantasy, the inversion of every clean your room you'd ever heard in your life. And it was only the beginning, because then Nickelodeon said, what if we take Double Dare, remove the food, remove the parents, and make children compete like they're auditioning for the X Games? And thus, Guts, a show that asked what if middle school PE actually mattered. You had bungee cord basketball, artificial surfboards, obstacle courses that looked like American Ninja Warrior if it were designed by a 7-year-old with a sugar addiction. And the scoreboard? It looked like it was tracking missile launches. But nothing, and I mean nothing, compared to the aggro crag. Dude, if you grew up in the 90s, there were two mountains worth conquering. Mount Everest and the aggro crag. And between you and me, Everest was the easy one. The aggro crag was like if a disco ball and a Home Depot had a baby during a thunderstorm. Fog machines blasting, lights blinding, rocks falling from the ceiling like the world's tackiest avalanche. And these poor kids, these poor, breathless, puberty-onset children had to climb it while being screamed at by a referee dressed like a PE teacher who had lost a bet. But what made Guts legendary was not the competition. It was the clout. Because if you won, you didn't just get a medal. You got a full piece of the aggro crag. A neon green jagged hunk of plastic that looked like it could summon the power of Grayskull, but was probably made from the exact same material as the cups in your school cafeteria. And to this day, if someone pulled that thing out at a party, everyone in the room would bow, even the adults, especially the adults. It is and will always be the most prestigious trophy ever awarded to a sweaty 11-year-old in gym shorts. And then, after Double Dare set the stage, and after Guts convinced us we were athletes, Nickelodeon unleashed the true beast, Legends of the Hidden Temple. This show wasn't a game show. It was a fever dream. It was laser tag meets a museum tour meets a panic attack. And the teams alone were iconic. The blue barracudas, red jaguars, green monkeys, purple parrots, silver snakes, orange iguanas. Every school playground had at least one kid who pretended to be a barracuda, even though they were absolutely a green monkey in real life. The first half of the show, pure fun, simple challenges, races, trivia. But the temple run, that was childhood anxiety weaponized. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, could prepare you for the temple guards. They would jump out of hidden doors like IRS agents auditing your lemonade stand. No warning, no mercy, just pure basement-dwelling boogeyman energy. You could give those kids medallions, but let's be real. Once a grown man in a burlap skirt leaps out at you from behind a foam rock, it's fight or fucking flight time. And then, the silver monkey. We've talked about it. We'll talk about it again. We will never stop talking about it. Because while the temple was terrifying, the real villain of Legends was not the guards, or even the timer, or even Olmec. It was that stupid, cursed, three-piece statue. Just three pieces. Head, body, base. And kids would lose their minds like they had just been asked to defuse a nuclear bomb. I'm telling you, no child on Earth was ready for that kind of pressure. Meanwhile, millions of us at home were screaming like tiny armchair quarterbacks. Turn the base around. It's upside down. Bro, just set it down. You're holding it backwards. Oh my God. This statue, more than any math class, any bully, any science fair, has shaped our generation's anxiety framework more than we're willing to admit. And Nickelodeon knew exactly what they were doing. And looking back, none of this should have worked. Dumping kids in slime, throwing them onto neon-colored mountains, letting them loose in a foam-lined temple filled with jump scare dads. But here's the secret. Nickelodeon understood kids on a spiritual level. Kids don't want polished. Kids want unpredictable. Kids want chaos with rules that barely matter. Kids want to see other kids get messy, get loud, get scared, and still have the time of their lives. Nickelodeon game shows were the first time TV said, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be brave enough to try and maybe fall into a giant nose. And as wild as it sounds, that meant everything to us 90s kids. And it set the tone for what came next. Because if Nickelodeon owned the after-school adrenaline rush, the true rite of passage came when the sun went down on the weekends. The snacks came out, and the orange couch lit up like a beacon calling all sleepovers home. That's where we're heading now, into the glow of the Saturday Night Rebellion. Into the world where Nickelodeon said, okay, kids, it's dark. Your parents are in the other room. Let's get weird. Because once you got your daily fix of kids falling off foam platforms and being jump scared by men in dollar store Aztec cosplay, there was only one place left on Earth where the energy didn't crash. Saturday nights. You know how every religion has a sacred object? Catholics have rosaries, the Jedi Knights have their lightsabers, gamers have unopened collector's editions they'll never admit they regret buying. Us 90s kids, we had the orange couch. You didn't sit on the orange couch. You aspired to it. It was the throne of Nickelodeon, a symbol, a beacon calling every kid with access to cable television to gather around the TV like it was the campfire of our tribe. And when you saw that glowing, absurdly bright, probably sticky couch floating in the pitch black void during the bumper, you knew. It was SNICK time. Saturday Night Nickelodeon wasn't just a programming block. It was a lifestyle, a rite of passage. If you were allowed to stay up for SNICK, dude, your parents trusted you. Or, more likely, they thought you'd fall asleep on the couch and give them a break. And fair, they weren't wrong. SNICK always hit different. It was the one time Nickelodeon told us kids, hey, you know how we normally talk to you like hyperactive cartoon gremlins? Yeah, not tonight. Tonight, you're cool. You're mature. You're night people. Kids didn't get nighttime content anywhere else. Not made for us. Everything else was prime time for adults or reruns for babies. But SNICK? SNICK was teen energy before any of us technically were teens. I want you to think of SNICK like the younger, weirder cousin of ABC's TGIF block. If TGIF was the structured, choreographed boy band of the 90s, SNICK was the garage punk band playing 3 chords slightly off key and somehow sounding better for it. SNICK would whisper to us, "You're old enough for weird stuff now. Don't tell your parents." And SNICK usually kicked off with all that. And let me tell you, this show didn't just land, it hit. It hit like that first sip of Mountain Dew after 9 p.m. It hit like blowing dust out of a Nintendo cartridge and watching it actually work. It hit like you just unlocked cheat codes in real life. All that was kid-friendly Saturday Night Live. But here's the secret. It was often funnier than SNL at the time. So let me break down the vibe. Kenan Thompson, a man who has since served more years on actual SNL than some American presidents, was in a bathtub speaking fake French in a raincoat, sitting in suds, mumbling absolute nonsense like a poetic fever dream. Lori Beth Denberg was giving vital information like the world's most chaotic librarian. Amanda Bynes was doing sketches with the raw comedic energy of a child who had mainlined a pixie stick slurry. Kel Mitchell was creating line delivery so iconic that 30 years later, "Welcome to Good Burger, home of the Good Burger, can I take your order?" still exists in the collective human consciousness like a spell. And the thing is, all that felt like kids who were actually funny. Not parents think this is funny, but genuinely hilarious. Their jokes were absurd, unhinged, and made specifically for us. Not watered down, not baby-proof, not made safe for PTA meetings. It was chaos comedy, and it was absolutely perfect. And at home, it did something really important. It made us feel like we could be funny. That our dumb little characters and inside jokes with friends weren't just nonsense. They were the raw material of something that could be on TV. Nickelodeon didn't just let kids watch comedy, they let kids be the comedy. And then afterwards, you'd get something like Clarissa Explains It All, a show so ahead of its time that if it premiered today, she'd have a TikTok following the size of a small nation. Clarissa wasn't just a character. She was the prototype for the relatable teen narrator. She talked directly to us. She stared dead into the camera like she was co-conspiring with you personally. She had graphics pop up on screen like she was running her own Twitch stream. And her fashion? Listen, Clarissa was in the trenches setting trends that would absolutely destroy Urban Outfitters shelves 20 years later. Those layered shirts, the hats, the combat boots, the weird patterns that should not have worked together but somehow did. That was peak kid who knows she's cool energy. And Sam? Her best friend who just climbed a ladder into her bedroom window every single episode? We all collectively just accepted that. No questions asked. If a teenage boy climbed a ladder into a teenage girl's room today, half of TikTok would explode and the other half would call Chris Hansen. But in 94? Yeah, that was friendship. And then there was Kenan and Kel, a show so iconic that even saying the words, "Who loves orange soda?" will summon at least one millennial from within a 3-mile radius. This show wasn't trying to impress adults. It was pure childlike joy and chaos. Kenan always had a scheme. Kel always had a poorly timed entrance. And orange soda? Dude, orange soda was basically a third co-star. The chemistry between the two was insane. It felt like you were watching two best friends make each other laugh to the point of collapse while the cameras just so happened to be rolling. Every kid wanted a friendship like that. Every kid wanted to be dumb with someone like that. Every kid wanted to break into a store after hours to fix a mistake that started with a jug of citrus soda. It was dumb, it was loud, but it was heartfelt. And just when you thought Nickelodeon had cornered the market on grounded weird, it said, all right, cool, you like relatable? Let's put some radioactive ooze on it. The secret world of Alex Mack took all that identity confusion and sprinkled hazardous waste on top. Alex was a regular kid, awkward, a little shy, stuck between older sister expectations and adult obliviousness. Then, one day on her bike, she gets doused in some neon corporate chemical with a safety protocol that would make OSHA spontaneously combust. And suddenly, she can turn into this shiny, mercury-looking liquid. Think the T-1000 from Terminator 2. Slip under doors and through cracks, zap things with electricity, and generally break every known law of biology. Alex wasn't a spandex superhero. She wasn't out there punching bad guys through walls. She was trying not to get grounded while also not getting kidnapped by a corporation that wanted to dissect her like a frog in science class. There was this incredible suburban unease to the whole thing. You had the friendly streets, lockers, cafeteria drama, and then shadowy men in suits whispering about the subject driving around in ominous vans that definitely weren't up to emission standards. It was the X-Files starter pack. And under all that sci-fi dressing, you had very real emotional stuff. Feeling like your family doesn't really see you, feeling guilty keeping secrets from your best friend, feeling different in a way you can't explain. There's a reason a lot of people read Alex's story later as a metaphor for puberty, for queerness, for anxiety, for that feeling of something about me has changed and I don't know who I am anymore, but I know I'm not what everyone thinks. And that's heavy shit for a show where the main character occasionally becomes a puddle. But that's exactly why it landed. You see, Nickelodeon trusted kids to handle metaphors. It trusted them to live in a story that was weird on the surface but emotionally honest underneath. And then there was the weirdest, most poetic, most quietly brilliant show Nickelodeon ever produced. The one that didn't treat childhood as a phase or a punchline, but as full-blown mythology. I'm talking about the adventures of Pete and Pete. Pete and Pete isn't just a show you remember. It's almost a show that remembers you. It has that dreamlike quality where you're not really sure if you watched it or just dreamed it. But either way, it changed your brain chemistry. Two brothers, both named Pete. No explanation. Did their parents run out of names? Was it a bit? Were they cursed? The show never really answers. And that's kind of the point. Their mom? Metal plate in her head that picked up radio stations. Sometimes she'd pick up signals from faraway places like she had a superpower, except no one calls it that. Their world was just tilted, just off-center enough to feel magical. Take Artie, the strongest man in the world. Capital letters, full title. A grown man in red and blue spandex who sprinted around their neighborhood like a hyperactive demigod. He'd flex at the sun, strike heroic poses at things that absolutely did not require heroism, encourage little Pete with the fervor of a coach, a big brother, and a cartoon character merged into one. In any other show, Artie would be the punchline, but in Pete and Pete, he's treated like a legend. Then you had Endless Mike, the school bully who approached intimidation like performance art. Part crime boss, part dictator, part substitute teacher who enjoys giving pop quizzes. Ellen, who floated in and out of Big Pete's orbit like the eternal, are we just friends or are we something person every kid has at some point. Mr. Tasty, the ice cream man with a giant plastic cone for a head who never took his mask off and somehow was not creepy, just sad and mysterious in a way that made your heart hurt a little bit. Even the episodes themselves felt like folklore. A war over daylight savings time, epic battles against the tyranny of bedtimes, a summer day so perfect the kids try to trap it in amber by refusing to let it end. Pete and Pete took the tiniest feelings, boredom, longing, embarrassment, crushes, the weird sadness of the last day of summer, and blew them up to mythic scale. It treated childhood like it was important, like it mattered, like it was worth taking seriously, even when it was ridiculous. And it did it without ever once saying, "This is very special," or "Here's the lesson." It just let you live there for 22 minutes at a time. And then, once Nick had you laughing, once you were lulled into that safe, goofy orange couch warmth, they hit you with the ghost stories. Are You Afraid of the Dark slunk in at the tail end of the block like the kid at the sleepover who waited until everyone was full of pizza and sugar and then said, "Okay, now that it's dark, want to hear something messed up?" The opening credits still hold up as "oh no" energy. That shot of the empty playground, the swing moving by itself, the boat, the clown doll in the attic. The theme music that said, "You're going to regret this around 2 o'clock in the morning, but press play anyway." The Midnight Society felt like a secret club we were all unofficial members of. Kids sneaking into the woods at night, no parents, no flashlights, just a campfire and questionable decision making to toss magic dust into the flames and tell scary stories. Looking back as an adult, you go, where are their guardians? Does no one know where these children are? But as a kid, you went, God, I wish I had friends cool enough to do this with. Those stories embedded themselves, the ghostly janitors, the haunted camera, the grinning clowns, the things behind doors that shouldn't open. Are You Afraid of the Dark didn't baby us. It invited us into the genre. It said you can handle being scared. You're not made of glass. And for a lot of people, that show is the reason they grew up loving horror, loving weird fiction, loving that little shiver you get when the lights are off and the hallway is just a bit too quiet. So SNICK covered a lot of ground. Sketch, sitcom, spooky anthology. It gave us laughs, friendship, and fear all in one night. If All That and Kenan and Kel were about laughing with your friends, if Clarissa was about narrating your inner monologue, if Alex Mack was about feeling strange in your own skin, Pete and Pete was about the poetry of being a kid, the way a single summer can feel like an epic, the way the weird kid down the street can feel like a prophet, the way your neighborhood feels like the whole universe, and the idea of ever leaving it is both exciting and terrifying. Nickelodeon in this era wasn't just entertaining kids. It was documenting them. In slime and sketch comedy, sure, but also in these weirder, quieter, more tender ways. It was building a mirror where you could see yourself. Messy, loud, scared, brave, weird, and feel like that was okay. Maybe even kind of awesome. And just when they'd done all that in live action, just when they nailed the "this is who you are" side of the equation, Nickelodeon took a deep breath, flipped the canvas, and asked, okay, we know who you are. Now, what does your imagination look like? Identity, character, animation, weirdness. Because the moment the orange splat slid over from live action into that wild, squiggly, anarchic world of early 90s animation, Nicktoons weren't just about to join the party. They were about to redefine childhood, and maybe the entire landscape of American cartoons forever. Now, before we dive into Doug's sweater vest, before we talk about Rugrats' lopsided heads, and we get into the grotesque fever dream that was Ren and Stimpy, we've got to go back. Back to the future! No, sorry, wrong line. But we are going back to the time where that line was made famous. And I'm talking about the late 1980s. A time when American animation was, well, let's be honest here, just the toy aisle with a theme song. If you turned on the TV as a kid in that era, you were basically watching a commercial disguised as a cartoon, with action figures disguised as characters, and a plot disguised as buy the playset with additional accessories sold separately. The formula was simple and cynical: character to toy to profit to repeat. Shows weren't designed to move kids emotionally, they were designed to move product. It was capitalism with laser beams and capes. And sure, we loved some of those shows. I'm not pretending Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles didn't go absolutely hard, but the storytelling environment, it was stale, it was predictable, and it was corporate. And Nickelodeon? Nickelodeon was watching all of this from the sidelines. They weren't a major power just yet. They weren't the kings of kids' cable. They were weird, scrappy, a little broke, and a whole lot of desperate. And most importantly, they were hungry. Enter Geraldine Laybourne, the woman who wanted to blow up kids' TV. Nickelodeon president Geraldine Laybourne looked at the landscape and said something that was basically considered heresy at the time. Why don't we make cartoons that kids actually relate to? Not cartoons that sell toys, not cartoons that preach moral lessons at you like a Saturday morning sermon, and not cartoons that adults think kids want, but cartoons that reflect what childhood feels like: messy, awkward, funny, surreal, a little emotional, a little scary, and a lot of weird. This idea was so radical that people in the industry genuinely thought it wouldn't work. Kids watching a cartoon with no action figures, no laser battles, no toy tie-ins? People thought Nickelodeon had lost its damn mind. Executives were like, "You want to make a cartoon about a shy kid with a journal? You want to make a show about babies? You want a cartoon where the animation looks intentionally ugly? You want a dog and a cat fused together at the spine?" And Nickelodeon just said, yes. Because here's the thing: Nickelodeon believed kids were smarter than the industry gave them credit for. Kids don't just want spectacle. Kids want stories. Kids want characters. Kids want something that sticks to their ribs. But if you're going to launch an animation revolution, you need three things. 1, creators with actual voices. 2, freedom from toy companies and corporate notes. And 3, a ton of bravery, or recklessness depending on who you ask. And Nickelodeon, it had all three. And on August the 11th, 1991, they pulled the trigger. 3 shows, 3 gambles, 3 are we really doing this moments. Not a Saturday morning block, not a dump of reruns from other studios, but 3 original cartoons airing back to back. Doug, Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, the first ever Nicktoons. And whether anyone realized it or not, in that moment, the entire landscape of children's animation changed. These were not corporate cartoons. They were personal cartoons. They looked different. They felt different. They were different. And for kids tuning in, it was like someone cracked open the door to a new universe. Doug was quiet. The Rugrats was chaotic. Ren and Stimpy was a psychedelic nightmare. 3 shows that had absolutely nothing in common except that none of them looked like anything else on TV. Each one represented a different facet of childhood. Doug, the inner life. Rugrats, the outer chaos. Ren and Stimpy, the unhinged imagination. Nickelodeon didn't create a brand. They created a language. And once those 3 shows hit the air, the rest of the 90s never stood a chance. This wasn't just a programming move. This was cultural rebellion. Kids were finally getting animation that didn't talk down to them, didn't try to sell them anything, and didn't treat them like tiny consumers. It treated them like people. People with emotions, people with anxieties, people with weird thoughts and big imaginations, people with complicated inner worlds. The Nicktoons era didn't just define a generation, it revealed one, and it all started with a shy kid from Bluffington. If the birth of Nicktoons was a rebellion, Doug was its poet, and not a loud poet, not a slam poetry, finger-snapping performance art poet. No, Doug was the quiet kid poet, the kid who sat in homeroom with a pencil case organized by color, the kid who did not have the kind of anxiety that required medication, but definitely had the kind of anxiety that required a journal. Doug Funny was the patron saint of sensitive kids everywhere. And Nickelodeon opening their revolution with this kid, this soft boy, was an absolute flex. Because remember, in the early 90s, boy protagonists in cartoons were loud, hyperactive, violent, superheroes, Ninja Turtles, occasionally wearing hammer pants. But Doug? Doug was a boy who had to mentally rehearse ordering a sandwich. Doug was the I'm gonna overthink this until the heat death of the universe kid. Doug was the blueprint for every millennial who has ever needed 3 days to recover from sending an email. And Nickelodeon said, yes, this boy is our flagship protagonist. That is wild, that is beautiful, and that is revolutionary. So let's talk about where he came from. Doug began not as a toy pitch, not as a corporate mandate, not as an advertisement for action figures, but as the literal doodles of its creator, Jim Jenkins, a man who basically walked into Nickelodeon with a stack of childhood therapy sessions disguised as cartoon characters. Jenkins said, Doug is me, except braver, which is the most Doug Funny thing anyone has ever said. He pulled from his own journals, his crushes, his embarrassing moments, his daydreams, his neuroses, his middle school hellscape. And Nickelodeon, in a move no other network would have done, didn't say, can we make him cooler? Can he be a superhero? Can he shoot lasers? Can he kickflip off a blimp? No. Nick said, cool, let him be vulnerable. Let him be awkward. Let him make mistakes. Let him want things and be afraid to ask for them. Let him be human. It was the first time in kids' animation that the protagonist didn't need to be aspirational. He could just be relatable. So let's talk about Patty Mayonnaise. She wasn't like the other cartoon crushes of the era. She wasn't a princess, a pop star, a warrior, a magical anything. No, Patty was a nice girl with a ponytail who played sports and treated Doug like a human being. And Doug Funny fell for her in a way that felt honest. Not melodramatic, not exaggerated, just real. Patty was the first time many of us understood what a crush felt like. Not fireworks, not harps, not sparkles. Just that thing where your entire body turns into a Windows 95 error message anytime the person you like says hello. Doug wrote songs for Patty. Doug practiced conversations with Patty. Doug narrated his inner monologue about Patty until you wanted to reach into the screen and say, buddy, breathe. Just breathe, my guy. Patty Mayonnaise, the original millennial heartthrob. And let's talk about Skeeter Valentine, the most chaotic good best friend in cartoon history. Skeeter was that kid everyone knows, the one who says, hey Doug, in a voice that breaks the sound barrier, beatboxes when he has no reason to, dresses like every day is 1993, knows literally everyone, and has the energy of a golden retriever that swallowed a boombox. Skeeter was the friend who made Doug braver simply by existing. And his beep 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 dee 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 beep greeting, if you walked into a cafeteria in 93 and made that noise, at least 3 kids would turn around and answer it involuntarily like a reflex. Skeeter was the emotional support hype man we all needed. And what about Roger Klotz? He was Nickelodeon's greatest bully because he wasn't evil. He was kinda pathetic. A broke kid from the bad part of town. a bully whose power came entirely from his own insecurities. Roger had the attitude of a 13-year-old who failed the villain exam and is retaking it next semester. He was not tough. He wasn't strong. And he wasn't popular. He was just a kid who didn't know who he was just yet. And isn't that the truth behind 90% of childhood bullies? Doug didn't fight Roger. Doug didn't beat Roger in competitions. Doug didn't one-liner him into oblivion. Doug outgrew him, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Roger was the perfect antagonist for a show built on internal conflict, and Doug's imagination was a core part of the show. Quail Man. He was the first superhero whose powers included hope, mild confidence, and the ability not to cry during group presentations. Doug didn't imagine himself as Batman. He just imagined himself as a boy in a belt on his forehead. This was what made Doug relatable. His fantasies were just as awkward as his real life. He wasn't escaping reality. He was coping with it. Quail Man wasn't wish fulfillment. He was emotional survival. And every kid got that. So let's talk about the art style real quick. Doug looked like someone animated a middle school notebook doodle. Bluffington wasn't bold. Bluffington wasn't saturated. Bluffington was muted, pastel, gentle, a visual metaphor for childhood being both comforting and a little melancholy. It was a world that felt like a memory even while you were watching it. No sharp edges, no neon wildness, just calm lines, soft shapes, and colors that felt like hand-me-downs. Doug looked handmade. Doug felt handmade. And listen, we've got to talk about it. When Doug moved to Disney, something felt off. Not bad, just wrong, different. Doug's hair got darker. Roger got rich. Patty got a haircut. Characters got standardized. The aesthetic got cleaner, shinier, more corporate. It was no longer the diary of an anxious boy anymore. It was just a cartoon. Nickelodeon Doug felt like our childhood. Disney Doug felt like merchandise. And there's nothing wrong with the Disney version, but as a generation, we bonded with the Nickelodeon version, the messy one, the earnest one, the soft one, the imperfect one. Because Doug wasn't just a cartoon. Doug was a mirror. And Nickelodeon letting that be their first Nicktoon, that was the loudest, quiet statement in all of animation history. Now, if Doug was the soft boy who whispered us into the Nicktoons era, Rugrats was the show that picked us up, shook us around like a snow globe, and then fed us a Reptar candy bar. This was Nickelodeon's second salvo in the animation revolution, and it was bold in ways people still don't give it enough credit for. Because Rugrats wasn't just a cartoon about babies, a merchandise machine, or an early morning staple. Rugrats was an art movement, a surrealist look at childhood through the eyes of literal infants, a psychology lesson hidden inside a diaper, a parental satire wrapped in a crayon scribble. And it all came from a studio that looked like a fever dream. So let's set the scene. Nickelodeon goes out looking for studios to animate one of its new Nicktoons. Every studio says, "Oh, sure, yeah, we'll make a cartoon for kids. We'll give them cute characters. We'll make the animation clean. We'll make it toy-friendly." Klasky Supo said, "What if the babies look like they were drawn by someone having an existential crisis at 3 a.m.? And Nickelodeon, bless their hearts, said, "Yeah, let's go with that idea." Klasky Supo wasn't a toy studio. They weren't a traditional animation house. They were the artsy punk rock Eastern European influenced weird indie studio on the corner. So if Pixar is an Apple store, Klasky Supo was a thrift store run by a chain-smoking abstract painter. And their entire aesthetic was wiggly lines, off-center backgrounds, strange color choices, characters with more teeth than should be legal. And this wasn't laziness. It was philosophy. Their style said childhood is not clean. Childhood isn't perfect. Childhood is messy, uneven, loud, confusing, and surreal. And holy shit, did they absolutely nail it. And here's what made Rugrats special. The babies weren't stupid. They weren't babbling caricatures. They weren't props for adult jokes. They were small humans trying to figure out an overwhelming world. And that was 100% revolutionary. Rugrats used the baby perspective to turn mundane household objects into cosmic mysteries, turn a staircase into Mount Everest, turn a backyard into a jungle, turn a vacuum cleaner into a Lovecraftian monster, and turn a simple mispronunciation into a world-ending prophecy. Every single episode was built on a rule Nickelodeon had never allowed before. Treat kids' imaginations as reality. The show wasn't about what the babies thought was happening. The show made their imagination the literal universe of the episode. That is joy in its purest form. So let's talk about the Rugrats lineup, the most chaotic group of under 3-year-olds ever assembled. Up first, Tommy Pickles, Diaper, Screwdriver, Fearless Optimism. Tommy wasn't a baby. Tommy was the leader of a tiny revolution. He was the rare cartoon protagonist who wasn't loud, wasn't cocky, wasn't goofy, and wasn't a joke machine. Tommy was brave. And why? Because he loved his friends more than he feared the unknown. That is some protagonist energy. And next, Chucky Finster, Anxiety King, Asthma Coded, the original millennial. Chucky taught us it was okay to be scared, okay to hesitate, okay to not want to participate. But Chucky also taught us that sometimes, you push forward anyways. Every millennial who has ever tried to hype themselves up before a job interview, that's pure Chucky energy. Then you've got Phil and Lil, the twins who existed purely to introduce chaos. If the babies were archetypes, Phil and Lil were feral goblins. The mud-eating, the bug-collecting, the gleeful destruction. In every friend group, there's always one kid who doesn't fear germs, God, or gravity. Rugrats had two. Then you've got Angelica Pickles. Oh yes. Yes. Angelica is one of the greatest animated villains ever. A 3-year-old tyrant, a manipulator, a liar, a gossiper, a schemer with the voice of a chain-smoking CEO. But here's the brilliance. Angelica wasn't evil. Angelica was just lonely. She was older than the babies, too young for the adults, caught between worlds. Every Angelica episode had a core of sadness beneath the cruelty. That's why she worked. And then, Susie Carmichael, the anti-Angelica, the balance, the voice of reason. Susie was everything Angelica wasn't. Kind, supportive, oozing confidence, and rocking the best toddler drip in the universe. The Carmichaels brought warmth, representation, and stability into a show full of chaos. And then, Stu Pickles, the father of a whole generation. Exhausted, inventing things in the early morning hours, always one deadline away from an emotional breakdown. Tell me you've never been up late working on a passion project thinking, I've lost control of my life. Stu Pickles walked so every millennial could run on caffeine and self-doubt. And Rugrats worked because its writers were either very tired parents, adults who remembered childhood vividly, brilliant chaos gremlins, or all three combined. Adults watched Rugrats for the jokes about taxes, sleep deprivation, parenting meltdown, the horrors of daycare, corporate nonsense. Dee Dee, I'm having a bad day. Kids saw adventure. Adults saw a documentary. And Rugrats also did something unheard of at the time. They gave kids honest, respectful Jewish representation. The Hanukkah episode, the Passover episode, Those weren't jokey holiday specials. Those were carefully crafted, sincere stories that taught kids that other cultures mattered. Stu arguing with Grandpa Boris about who tells the story. That's family. That's heritage. That's real. Rugrats didn't just entertain children, it validated them. Then came the Rugrats movie in 1998. It made over $140 million. It introduced the world to dill pickles. It had an actually incredible soundtrack. Rugrats went from weird little cable cartoon about babies to box office stardom, merch titan, global brand, Nickelodeon's flagship. Then came Rugrats in Paris, which, let's be honest, had no right to go that hard emotionally. Chaz Finster finding love, Chucky dancing with Coco LaBouche and desperately whispering, "I want a mommy to love me." That was generational therapy. And then there was All Grown Up, which was fine. It existed. But the magic, that was in the original series. And the original showrunner, Paul Germain, was fired after conflicts with Klasky Supo. The show was retooled, new writers came in, and the tone shifted. And us fans, we noticed. But here's the thing. Even with its bumps, Rugrats remained one of the most important pieces of children's animation ever created. It was weird, it was messy, it was brilliant, and it was brave. It was childhood. And real quick, let's hit the pause button because before we talk about Ren and Stimpy, I need to put something up front, loud and clear. Ren and Stimpy is one of the most groundbreaking, influential cartoons ever put on television. But its creator, John Kricfalusi, was not a misunderstood genius. He was an eccentric artist. He was, by multiple accounts, an abusive boss and a fucking predator. People who worked on his show described toxic, hostile work environments, emotional manipulation, and burnout. And years later, reports surfaced about him grooming teenage girls, which is beyond unacceptable, beyond unforgivable, and absolutely worth condemning without hesitation. Nickelodeon eventually fired him, and frankly, they should have fucking done it sooner. So, here's the deal. We're going to talk about the show's artistic impact, the animation style, the comedy, the legacy, because those things shaped the industry. But we are not separating the art from the artist to protect his reputation. We are separating them to protect and honor the people he harmed and the crew who made something absolutely incredible despite him. And if that makes anyone uncomfortable, good. This part of Nickelodeon's history should make us uncomfortable. Ren and Stimpy changed animation forever, but the cost behind the scenes was steep, and the responsibility belongs solely to the man who abused his fucking power. Now, with that clarity in place, let's talk about the show, the artistry, and the impact, because the legacy of Ren and Stimpy belongs to the animators who survived that environment and not the man who poisoned it. Ren and Stimpy is the part of Nickelodeon's history where the word groundbreaking doesn't even come close. Ren and Stimpy didn't break the ground. It took a jackhammer to the foundation, set the debris on fire, danced in the ashes, and then ate the ashes and spit them back out in the form of a screaming chihuahua. No show looked like it. No show sounded like it. No show animated like it. No show disturbed parents the way it did. And no show made kids cackle, recoil, and stare at the TV like they were witnessing forbidden knowledge. Ren and Stimpy was Nickelodeon's chaos grenade, a show that shouldn't have existed, that ended up redefining everything. But behind that radioactive glow was a creator whose behavior poisoned the well, and whose legacy we will not romanticize. This is the story of the art that shook the world and the damage caused by the man who abused his power. So let's talk about both. So if Doug whispered us into the Nicktoons era and Rugrats waddled through it in diapers, Ren and Stimpy kicked the fucking door down, screamed at the top of its lungs, and rubbed its nipples on the carpet. This show was weird. It was gross, and it was visceral. Before Ren and Stimpy, cartoons followed rules. Characters stayed on model. Humor stayed mild. Expressions stayed readable. Backgrounds stayed predictable. Everything was smooth and clean. Ren and Stimpy said, "What if we did the exact opposite?" It gave us zoom in, gross out still frames, hyper detailed butt cracks, teeth animated in 4K before 4K even existed, the first cartoon ASMR, which was mostly just unpleasant mouth noises, bodily fluids in quantities previously unseen in Western animation, expressions so exaggerated they looked like medical illustrations of psychological collapse. Ren and Stimpy wasn't a show. It was a visual slap in the face. And yet, beneath the chaos, the show was exquisitely crafted. Every frame, every smear, every grotesque close-up was deliberate. You had traditional squash and stretch. Then you had Ren and Stimpy's let's stretch this character's spine like a rubber band and make it snap back with the sound of a wet lasagna. It was bold, it was artistic, it was absolutely deranged, and us kids and animators couldn't look away. And here's where the storytelling gets a little complicated. Because while Ren and Stimpy was a masterpiece, John Kricfalusi was not. He was the wrong man with the right vision. A guy who could storyboard a comedic masterpiece but couldn't run a studio without hurting people. Someone who saw himself as a tortured genius while actually torturing the people around him. Animators described hostile, abusive work environments, impossible deadlines, emotional manipulation, intimidation, sexualized comments, favoritism, public meltdowns, unsafe working expectations, and eventually, as we acknowledged earlier, allegations far worse. Nickelodeon eventually fired him, not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. They had a hit show created by someone who refused to be managed, refused to be ethical, and refused to put the well-being of others above his own ego. Ren and Stimpy should never be reduced to the creator did everything. Kricfalusi was a visionary, sure, but the animators, they were the miracle workers. They were the ones redrawing scenes 40 fucking times because the director rejected everything but perfection. They built the visual language that shaped SpongeBob, South Park, Clone High, Adventure Time, and half of Adult Swim. They suffered under a man who believed cruelty was a leadership style. The show succeeded because of their resilience, not his abuse. So let's honor that. Ren and Stimpy was a sketchbook of insanity. Stimpy's invention, the Happy Helmet episode, is widely regarded as one of the greatest cartoons ever made. A descent into madness so perfectly structured it should be shown in film schools. The Royal Canadian Kilted Yaxman gave us a national anthem so absurd it still gets quoted 30 years later. Space Madness is the pinnacle of animated psychological breakdown. Big House Blues introduced the world to Ren's violent insecurity and Stimpy's dopey, guileless sweetness. A buddy comedy duo that shouldn't work but absolutely does. The show constantly teetered between Looney Tunes, Salvador Dali, Tex Avery, A Fever Dream, and a rejected MTV liquid television short. It was unpredictable, uncomfortable, and utterly magnetic. Ren and Stimpy was the first kids' cartoon to normalize dark humor, implied violence, Adult Swim level absurdity, surrealism, manic emotional swings, long pauses that forced audiences to sit in discomfort. Before the phrase, too spicy for children was a meme, Ren and Stimpy lived there permanently. This show made your parents walk into the room, stare at the TV, and say, "What in the hell are you watching?" And you really couldn't explain it, because you didn't even know. but you couldn't look away. It was like if Bugs Bunny had an anxiety disorder and Daffy Duck was on ketamine. Nickelodeon Standards and Practices Department was at war with Ren and Stimpy from day one. Scripts came in like, Stimpy eats cat litter. Ren slaps Stimpy 47 times. Stimpy coughs up a hairball the size of a Buick. Ren becomes emotionally unhinged and screams about existential dread. Standards and Practices said, no. Chris Falusi said, I'm going to do it anyway. Nickelodeon said, we are losing years off of our lives doing this. And the show kept pushing and pushing until inevitably it snapped. Production delays, unpredictable scripts, missed deadlines, and mounting behavioral issues finally hit critical mass. Nickelodeon fired Chris Falusi outright and handed the show to Billy West and the game's animation team. And here's the twist. The show got even better, more consistent, better timed, still absolutely insane, just less harmful behind the scenes. Ren was recast. Stimpy carried on. The world, it moved forward. And Chris Falusi faded, not because the world betrayed him, but because his own behavior was indefensible. Decades later, when the stories of grooming and abuse surfaced, the animation community was not surprised, not relieved, not shocked, just validated. The signs were always there, and it forced people to confront an uncomfortable truth. One of the greatest American cartoons ever made was created under conditions that no one should have had to endure. When we talk about Ren and Stimpy now, we talk about the art, the influence, the animators, the groundbreaking techniques, the performances, the style, the legacy. But we also talk about the abuse, the exploitation, the pain, and the cost. Because at the end of the day, it all matters. Ren and Stimpy influenced everything. Without it, there is no SpongeBob, Courage the Cowardly Dog, The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, Rick and Morty, Adventure Time, The Regular Show, Ed, Edd and Eddy, BoJack Horseman, Invader Zim, Adult Swim's literal entire identity, and basically the whole of the internet. It broke rules that animators didn't even realize were rules. Ren and Stimpy taught artists, you are allowed to get weird. And kids learned, you're allowed to like weird. Artists built the legacy. The crew carried the torch. John Chris Falusi did not. Ren and Stimpy belongs to the animators who survived that environment and still made something transcendent. Take a breath, shake off the heaviness. This was one of the darkest chapters of Nickelodeon's history. But guys, it's necessary, it's honest, and I hope I handled it with respect. Now we're going to pivot back toward the joyful surrealism of the era. All right, after that radioactive, chaotic blast radius that was Ren and Stimpy, Nickelodeon needed a palate cleanser. Something fun, something bright, something weird, but without the existential dread, the lawsuits, and the smell of emotional instability. Enter Rocko's Modern Life. So if Ren and Stimpy was the unhinged cartoon that broke the rules, Rocko was the cartoon that said, wait, what if we made adulthood the joke? And holy shit, did it work? Because Rocko's Modern Life was the quiet assassin of the Nicktoons lineup. Cheerful on the surface, but absolutely savage underneath. The show looked like bubblegum, it played like satire, and it hit harder than you remember. So let's dive in real quick. Rocko's Modern Life premiered in 1993, created by Joe Murray, a man whose art style whispers, I've seen things and instead of therapy, I just bought markers. Rocko was an Australian wallaby who moved to America and immediately discovered bills, bad neighbors, toxic workplaces, corporate greed, telemarketers, DMV purgatory, coffee addiction, existential dread, and the horrors of modern living. So in other words, Rocko was the first millennial. This show predicted everything. So let's talk about the characters. Up first, Rocko. Gentle, kind, really anxious. A small man in a great big world. The type of person who apologizes to the furniture when he accidentally bumps into it. Then there's Heifer, a cow raised by wolves. Literally, pure himbo energy. The friend you love deeply but cannot leave unsupervised for more than 4 minutes. His entire character arc is, oops. Then there's Filbert, hypochondriac turtle. Lives in permanent fight or flight mode. Iconic catchphrase, I'm nauseous, I'm nauseous. Filbert walked so every anxious millennial pacing in a grocery store could run. And let's be real, Rocko is the most adult Nicktoon Nickelodeon ever produced. This show gave us Rocko working at a phone sex hotline. Oh baby, oh baby, oh baby. The Choky Chicken restaurant, later renamed the more family-friendly Chewy Chicken. Mrs. Bighead trying to seduce Rocko. A colonoscopy episode. A credit card metaphor episode that hit way too close to home. Satire of Hollywood. Consumerism and capitalism. The immortal line, Wacky Deli. Rocko's Modern Life was Nickelodeon's Trojan horse. Cute, colorful cartoon on the outside, sharp, biting commentary on the inside. But here's the thing. Kids adored it anyway. Why? Because kids feel the absurdity of the adult world long before they understand it. Rocko didn't teach us adult reality. Rocko validated that reality. And Rocko looked like a sketchbook had exploded. It had elastic character designs, impossible architecture, color palettes chosen by someone who just discovered neon green, abstract angles, over-the-top reactions, the occasional Ren and Stimpy style close-up, but with less slime. It felt alive. It felt unpredictable. It felt like someone animated a fever dream experience during tax season. And it all worked. Rocko's Modern Life quietly tackled immigration, economic struggles, toxic workplaces, predatory capitalism, burnout, loneliness, friendships that evolve, and the absurdity of American culture. There is an actual episode where Rocko goes to the DMV and ends up in a Kafkaesque nightmare that perfectly encapsulates adulthood. Children, we didn't understand it, but adults felt it in their bones. Rocko was the first Nicktoon to say, grow up all you want, it still sucks sometimes. And in a weird way, that honesty comforted kids. Because the world was confusing, and adults were weird, and Rocko helped us laugh about it. Now, let's shift the gears. From corporate satire to monster school. Ah, Real Monsters was the first half of Nickelodeon's 1994 We're Embracing Our Inner Goblin Energy. This show screamed art school project, literally. Created by Klasky Supo, yes, the Rugrats weirdos. This show doubled down on crooked lines, asymmetrical faces, jagged silhouettes, weird textures, characters who looked like doodles from the margins of your homework. And it all worked, because Real Monsters wasn't trying to be cute. It was trying to be expressive. You've got Ickis, Short King, Insecure, always trying too hard. Basically a tiny Chucky with more self-sabotage. Then there's Oblina, the straight-A student of scaring. Confident, elegant, carries herself like she's auditioning for the Nightmare Before Christmas 2. She was the Hermione Granger of the monster world. Then there's Crumb, a hairy dude holding his eyeballs in his hands. Constantly smells bad, eats garbage, lives life unbothered. Crumb was the original I do not give a single fuck about your expectations icon. Real Monsters ran on one simple premise. What if scaring was homework? The Gromble, the headmaster, had big art teacher who expects too much from 10-year-olds kind of energy. Assignments included scare reports, field missions, collaborative shrieks, pop quizzes on terror. The world was surprisingly fleshed out. Monster tunnels, garbage chutes, underground layers, a society built around fear. It was imaginative, weird, and occasionally actually kind of creepy. But beneath the monster veneer was a story about belonging, insecurity, identity, trying to fit into a world that feels hostile. Which is exactly why this resonated with us 90s kids. Because childhood is monstrous sometimes, and not in a scary way, in a confusing way. The world outside is too big, expectations are too heavy, and adults make no sense. Monsters? Monsters make perfect sense. Ah Real Monsters was the purest expression of the Klasky Supo aesthetic. Scribbled lines, jagged backgrounds, shapes that shouldn't go together, bold but ugly color schemes, gritty textures, experimental animation. It was Nickelodeon saying, we care more about personality than polish. Modern networks would never greenlight this show today. And that's completely tragic. Because Ah Real Monsters taught a whole generation that it's okay to be weird. It's okay to be awkward. It's okay to not fit the mold. Your monstrous parts are worth celebrating. The real message? Being different is your superpower. Even if that superpower is smelling like hot garbage. Rocko was adult anxiety. Ah Real Monsters was childhood insecurity. Put them together, and you get a generation that learned. The world is confusing and uncomfortable, but humor makes it survivable. These shows didn't sugarcoat anything. Rocko taught us the absurdity of adulthood. Ah Real Monsters taught us the absurdity of ourselves. And we needed both. So if Rocko's Modern Life was Nickelodeon's satire machine and Ah Real Monsters was their art school statement piece, then these next two shows in the Nicktoons timeline were just pure chaos energy. One was about the most realistic sibling relationship ever put on screen, somehow portrayed through the lives of two beavers who lived in a bachelor pad. And the other? Well, let's just say the other one was a biological war crime. Welcome to Angry Beavers and Cat Dog, the phase of Nickelodeon's animation era where someone in the pitch room definitely said, okay guys, hear me out. What if we just went full weird? Angry Beavers premiered in 1997, created by Mitch Shower, and if you've ever had a sibling, this show was essentially therapy disguised as a cartoon. Because Norbert and Daggett weren't just beavers. They were every pair of siblings fighting for dominance, dignity, and control over the remote. They were rivalry, insecurity, petty revenge, brief alliances, mutual sabotage, childhood affection covered in 12 layers of denial, all wrapped in a cartoon that looked like someone animated sibling arguments from their own memory. So let's break down the dynamic. Norbert Foster Beaver, the older brother. He was smooth, confident, and painfully self-assured. He had perfectly coiffed cartoon hair, impeccable comedic timing, the voice of someone who always believed he was right, and the ability to weaponize sarcasm like a sniper rifle. Norbert was the golden child. Norbert was the kind of sibling who did everything well without trying and made you furious simply by existing. He wasn't mean. He wasn't a bully. He was just annoyingly good at everything, which brings us to Daggett. Daggett Doofus Beaver was raw energy, a walking impulse, a zero sugar Red Bull with buck teeth, all emotion, zero planning. He lived in perpetual fight or flight mode, except he picked fight every single time. Daggett is the kind of sibling who would chew through drywall, declare a wrestling match with no warning, panic at the sound of his own burp, start chaos and then flee the scene. Absolutely, he would ruin Thanksgiving dinner. And Nickelodeon said, yes, these are our guys. And Angry Beavers had a vibe. Their dam looked like a cross between a treehouse, a bachelor apartment, a hoarder's den, and a modernist wooden IKEA showroom. It was a perfect visual metaphor. Two siblings desperately trying to be grown-ups, failing, and then deciding, fuck it, let's eat cereal at midnight and throw logs around. Their lifestyle was aggressively millennial, before millennials even existed. Angry Beavers had wordplay, meta jokes, parody episodes, tone shifts, satire, fourth wall breaks, slapstick humor, and references that went right over us kids' heads. It was one of the first Nicktoons to embrace the adult kid dual layer writing style. And at its core, it was a show about emotional intelligence. Norb and Daggett loved each other deeply, but expressed it in the most unhealthy ways imaginable. Which, yeah, okay, that tracks. Oh, and we have to talk about it. The Angry Beavers finale was recorded but never aired. Why, you ask? Because in the finale, the brothers break the fourth wall. They learn their show is being canceled. They go full meta. They read the cancellation notice out loud. They mourn their own fictional existence. Nickelodeon said, absolutely not. This is too damn dark. And honestly, respect. But the fact that this finale exists, absolutely legendary. Now we're going to pivot from sibling psychology to cat dog. And listen, I'm going to say this with love. Cat dog should not exist. Not just as a show, as a creature. No scientist, biologist, or vet could ever explain what in the hell cat dog is. And believe me, I absolutely love cat dog. Cat dog is a creature that raises at least 87 questions. So here's a few. Where does the food go? Where does the food come out? How do they sleep? How do they walk? How do they run? How the fuck do they poop? Us 90s kids, we ask these questions. Scientists ask these questions. The writers ask these questions. The writers had no answers. And Nickelodeon said, perfect, let's give them 68 episodes. Cat dog is literally the odd couple fused together at the torso. Cat, sophisticated, anxious, neurotic, wants order. Dog, loud, impulsive, loves chaos, thinks with his stomach and vibes alone. It's the simplest conflict in the world. And yet, holy shit, did it work! Every episode was, cat, can we please behave like civilized organisms? Dog, I ate a couch. Cat, we need to pay our bills. Dog, I joined a biker gang. Cat, we must be delicate and cultured. Dog, I'm about to scream. The brilliance of Cat Dog is that the show understood something profound. Opposites don't just attract, they survive each other. And oh man, the Greaser Dogs? This was the greatest parody of 1950s street gangs ever seen in a kid's show. Cliff, Shriek, and Lube. They existed solely to terrorize Cat Dog, and yet were so dumb, so lovable, so absurd, that you couldn't help but adore them. They were also responsible for half the show's funniest moments. Cat Dog didn't need deep emotional arcs. It needed a gang of dumbass dogs screaming threats with zero follow-through. And Cat Dog's animation was elastic in the Ren and Stimpy tradition, but without the slime, the sadness, or the emotional trauma. It was expressive, fast, bouncy, and physical. Every stretch, squash, shake, and recoil was exaggerated to the extreme. Cat, anxiety spaghetti. Dog, optimism balloon. The entire show moved like someone animated ADHD, and that was the charm. Under the absurdity, Cat Dog hit on themes like family you don't get to choose, compromise, communication, setting boundaries, mutual dependence, literally, loving people who drive you insane. Cat Dog was messy, loud, and chaotic, but it was also a story about learning to live with someone radically different from you. A lesson every roommate, sibling, or partner eventually learns the hard way. Alright, we've talked weird, we've talked surreal, we've talked gross, chaotic, experimental, and a little unhinged. But now we're going to enter the era where Nickelodeon said, okay, what if we gave creators money and freedom but absolutely no supervision? Welcome to KaBlam, the sketch comedy petri dish of Nickelodeon. A show so experimental it felt like someone dumped an entire art school's folder of rejected final projects into a washing machine. KaBlam premiered in 1996 and immediately said, what if some of the segments are claymation? What if some look like notebook doodles? What if some are live action? What if some are stop motion but narratively incoherent? What if we don't bother choosing a single style ever? And Nickelodeon, in its most Nickelodeon move possible, said, yes, all of that. Full send. KaBlam was the anthology series of the Nicktoons universe, a variety show of animated fever dreams, each segment made by different creators, studios, and occasionally people who seemed like they absolutely never got enough sleep. It was the first show that made kids think, wait, cartoons don't all have to look the same? So let's break this glorious chaos down. KaBlam's wraparound segments starred Henry and June, two characters who looked like they escaped from a Bill Plimpton short and stumbled on the Nickelodeon soundstage. Henry and June were sarcastic, self-aware, chaotic, always breaking the fourth wall, constantly annoyed with each other, and frequently suffering from whatever bizarre animation glitch the episode needed that week. They were your tour guides through a multiverse where the rules were 1. There are no rules. 2. See rule number 1. KaBlam didn't just present cartoons, it celebrated the medium of animation as a whole. It let kids see the seams, the behind the curtain weirdness, the personality of creators. It made animation feel like something made by real humans, not corporate pipelines. And speaking of humans, let's talk about the segments that turned KaBlam from a quirky experiment into a cult masterpiece. This is it. The crown jewel, the center of the KaBlam universe. The segment that absolutely should not have worked, but became a generational icon. Action League Now was filmed in stop motion using literal dollar store action figures who could barely stand upright. The premise? Cheap toys as incompetent superheroes. And the roster was legendary. You've got the Flesh, super strong and super naked. A man whose superpower was basically having no pants and enormous confidence. Melt Man, with the power to melt. A guy whose power was melting into a puddle of uselessness at the worst possible time. Stinky Diver, a former Navy commando with an attitude as bad as his odor. He smelled like your childhood tackle box. Thunder Girl, she flies like thunder, whatever the fuck that means. And they were all sworn to justice under the guidance of the chief, a cranky bureaucrat who hated his job and the heroes who worked for him. Every episode was a masterpiece of D-grade puppetry, accidental slapstick, and intentional failure. Characters fell over constantly. Props broke. Shots were out of focus. The animation was sloppy on purpose. The chaos was the joke. And kids, we loved it. Action League Now gave us permission to embrace low-budget creativity, to believe that anything could be a cartoon if you just committed to the bit. It was a show made in the spirit of, you want superheroes? We have superheroes at home. And it was absolutely glorious. Next, a caveman, an alien, a camcorder, and the greatest comedic timing Nickelodeon ever produced. I'm talking Prometheus and Bob. And it felt like Chaplin, Buster Keaton, the Three Stooges, a beginner anthropology class, and Area 51 all thrown into a blender. The premise? An alien named Prometheus attempts to teach a primitive human, Bob, how to do basic tasks, like start a fire, ride a bike, use tools, cook, understand gravity, and not die. Every lesson went horribly wrong. Every attempt ended in catastrophe. Every episode was a perfect, tiny, tragic comedy. But the brilliance? It was silent storytelling. There was no dialogue, no exposition, just expressions, animation, and physical comedy. Prometheus and Bob proved that Nickelodeon believed kids were smart enough to understand subtle humor, and they were absolutely right. Then there was Life with Loopy. It looked like someone had animated a child's dream journal. The animation style? Jittery, crayon like, textured, deliberately rough, full of floating shapes, and bursting with abstract energy. The premise? A little girl named Loopy lives in a world where imagination is literally real. She walks on the moon because she feels like it, talks to imaginary creatures, travels inside her brother's body, turns existential dread into finger paint projects. It was surreal, whimsical, and extremely strange. Loopy made kids feel like their imagination wasn't something to hide, it was something to celebrate. Even if half the stuff she imagined could probably get you kicked out of most public libraries. KaBlam being an anthology meant there were dozens and dozens of smaller, lesser known segments that still deserve a shout out in this episode. Niz and Fondue, a hyperactive cat scratch precursor about two weasel brothers who treated chaos like oxygen. The Offbeats, a deadpan minimalistic oddball group who felt like they were animated inside a coffee shop open mic night. Jetcat, superhero girl who defended the town from oversized household objects. Peak 90s Nickelodeon energy. Inside Out Boy, the gym class legend whose body flipped inside out after going over the bar on a swing set. Every single one of these shorts made KaBlam feel like a creative laboratory. Like Nickelodeon was saying, please bring us your weird, bring us your experimental, bring us your unshaven indie creators who have a puppet in their backpack and a dream. KaBlam gave weirdos a home, and that mattered. Because here's the secret. KaBlam was Nickelodeon's incubator, a testing ground of sorts, a sketchbook for future creators. Without KaBlam, you don't get Invader Zim, Chalk Zone, the offbeat humor in SpongeBob SquarePants, Adult Swim's experimental shorts, Cartoon Network's Oh Yeah Cartoons, later anthology hits like Robot Chicken. KaBlam taught young animators your weird ideas are valid, and it taught us kids animation is limitless. And it taught Nickelodeon sometimes the best shows come from giving creators too much freedom and too little oversight. KaBlam was a love letter to creativity, and that creative freedom paved the way for something darker, stranger, and brilliant in a completely different way. Something that would become a cult phenomenon, something Nickelodeon barely understood, and something they were never prepared for. A show about an alien invader, a green psychopath, a doom-obsessed goth child, and a malfunctioning robot with a nacho addiction. That's right, it's time to buckle up, because we're about to enter the black hole of Nickelodeon's animation catalog. The one that sucked in every goth kid, every theater kid, every social outcast, every chaotic neutral middle schooler, every artist who drew on their Chuck Taylors, and every single one of us who looked at the world and said, yeah, but what if everything was just a little more unhinged? Because this is Invader Zim, a show that should never have existed on Nickelodeon, but thank the universe it did. This is the part of the story where Nickelodeon did something brave. They greenlit a show by a man whose job before this was drawing comics where characters regularly exploded into piles of organs. This is the part where Nickelodeon said, sure, let's give the goth comic guy a kid's show. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. And also, nothing. and also everything. So let's begin. Invader Zim was created by Yonan Vasquez, a man whose artistic vibe can be described as Hot Topic, scribbles of a gifted but deeply troubled 8th grader, a haunted Lisa Frank notebook, the guy who drew in the margins of every textbook you ever returned, nostalgic darkness, deep emotional damage wrapped in neon and eyeliner. Yonan was famous for his comic Johnny the Homicidal Maniac, a book about, well, exactly what the fucking title says. And Nickelodeon just said, yeah, this guy should make a kid's show. This is the creative equivalent of hiring Stephen King to write for Blue's Clues, and somehow, it was complete genius. So let's set the stage. Zim is an Irken invader, but he sucks at it. He sucks so bad that during the last military operation, he blew up his own planet, destroyed half the fleet, and caused so much damage his leaders now twitch when they hear his name. So the tallest, the world's most petty galactic dictators, decide to send him on a secret mission to a planet so far, so useless, so irrelevant that Zim will never matter again. That planet? Earth. This show was the story of an incompetent alien invader assigned to conquer a meaningless loser planet populated entirely by morons. This was a perfect premise. This was art. Zim is delusional, loud, narcissistic, screaming 90% of the time, possessed of a confidence not supported by any skill whatsoever, a terrible scientist, a worse soldier, and the proud owner of the worst disguise in animation history. Nothing about Zim works. Nothing. But he is so committed to the bit that you cannot help but root for him. Zim is every theater kid who went way too hard in drama class. Zim is every millennial who lied on their resume. Zim is every one of us who ever entered a job interview thinking, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I will pretend with all my heart. Now let's talk about Grr. Oh, Grr. Grr is the single most iconic character Nickelodeon ever accidentally greenlit. The tallest gave Zim a malfunctioning SIR unit, an advanced support robot designed for tactical brilliance. Zim instead gets Grr, a robot made of garbage, powered by waffles, ADHD, and vibes. Grr existed to derail every plan, scream, eat everything, adopt all the pigs, dance, run in circles, wear a dog suit that fooled absolutely no one, provide catchphrases that live on in the internet forever. Grr, why is there bacon in the soap? I made it myself. Grr is an icon, a legend, a being of pure serotonin and nonsense. And the fact that Nickelodeon aired Grr in primetime is proof that the 2000s were a magical mistake. And then there's Dib Membrane. He is the single most relatable character for gifted kids everywhere. He believes in aliens, believes in science, believes in the paranormal, and is surrounded by people who think he's a fucking idiot. His villain is not Zim. His villain is, no one believes me. Dib is doomed by the worst superpower imaginable. He is correct, but really annoying about it. Every goth kid, every cryptid enthusiast, every nerd who felt ignored saw Dib and whispered, same. This show was dark, weird, complex, brilliantly animated, expensively produced, beautifully scored, and written by people who were absolutely not trying to appeal to toddlers. Zim's humor was not slapstick, simple, or loud for loudness' sake. It was political satire, cosmic absurdism, nihilism, surreal horror, deadpan existential dread, shock comedy, and meta-social commentary. This was not a cartoon. It was a thesis disguised as screaming. And Nickelodeon was chewing its nails behind the scenes saying, why is this show scary? So let's talk about its style. Invader Zim looked like Tim Burton, Hot Topic goth, early internet humor, German expressionism, sci-fi horror, a haunted computer lab, and the weird kid you sat next to in algebra. The angular architecture, the shadows, the oppressive atmosphere, the neon greens and purples, the ghoulish faces, the grotesque close-ups, the screaming. This wasn't Nickelodeon energy. This was Adult Swim energy that got lost and wandered into the wrong building. And us 90s kids, we loved it. We saw ourselves in the weirdness. Invader Zim was safe rebellion, organized chaos, a show that said being weird isn't just okay, it's powerful. Invader Zim was too expensive, too dark, too smart, and too teen-oriented for Nickelodeon at the time. It was never meant to survive. But it didn't die. It transcended. It became a cult phenomenon, a hot topic empire, a bootleg merch industry, a foundational internet fandom, a precursor to modern online humor, and the blueprint for goth alt animation. It was so beloved that Netflix revived it in 2019 with Enter the Florpus, a movie that was somehow gorgeous, emotional, faithful, and still psychotic in all the right ways. Yonan Vasquez delivered a heartfelt message in that film. Thank you for holding on to this weird little universe. And we did. And Invader Zim was the end of an era. Weird, creator-driven, risky, bold, experimental. Because right after Zim, something happened at Nickelodeon. It got corporate. Fast. The network started saying, we want hits, we want merchandise, we want safe shows, we want to appeal to the broadcast audience. And thus, the toyetic trinity arrived. Fairly Odd Parents exploded onto the scene in 2001. Fast comedic timing, wish-based plots, strong characters, marketable, explosive humor, instantly iconic. Cosmo and Wanda became household names. Timmy became the face of Nickelodeon's next era. The show printed money. This was the beginning of factory-friendly Nicktoons. Shows that could generate toys, video games, lunchboxes, Halloween costumes. Creator-driven? Yes, but also brand-driven. And then Jimmy Neutron followed in 2002 and marked Nickelodeon's first major CGI hit, a movie-to-TV pipeline, a new tech-friendly look, and a universe perfect for merchandise. Jimmy Neutron was clean, polished, safe, STEM positive, loaded with toys, gadgets, and playset potential. It was the exact direction a growing network wanted to move. And Chalk Zone sits in this interesting middle ground. It was imaginative, creator-driven, weird, beautifully animated, and musically brilliant. But it also fit the new mold. Simple premise, toy-friendly, episodic, and easily marketable. Chalk Zone was the bridge, from the weird era to the safe, profitable, repeatable era. This is where Nickelodeon divides into before and after. Before, you had experimentation, strange ideas, risk-taking, artistic freedom, and creator-led visions. After, safer tones, corporate oversight, brand building, strong merchandise pipelines, and shows built to last decades. And standing right at the threshold, the torchbearer that survived both eras was SpongeBob SquarePants. He was the bridge, the survivor, the icon. SpongeBob wasn't just a hit, he was the hit. There's no going back now. We've surfed the slime, we've braved the weirdness, we've survived the aggro crag, the fourth wall implosions, the Ren and Stimpy fallout, and the doom of Invader Zim. But now we arrive at the axis point. The moment Nickelodeon stopped being one thing and became something else entirely. This is the story of a sponge, a fry cook, a yellow optimist with Squarepants and unbreakable joy, a character who became a mascot, a mega franchise, a merchandising juggernaut, a modern mythology, and eventually, through no fault of his own, the network's creative chokehold. This is the rise, rule, and reign of SpongeBob SquarePants. So let's begin at the beginning, before the memes, before the Broadway show, before the 24/7 reruns. Back when SpongeBob was just an idea from a marine biologist with a sense of humor and a heart of pure gold. Steven Hillenburg wasn't trying to reinvent television. He wasn't trying to build an empire. He wasn't thinking about toys or theme parks or memes or fast food tie-ins. The man was literally a marine biology teacher who loved tide pools, loved weird little ocean creatures, loved drawing, loved making people smile. That's it. That's the recipe. He worked on Rocko's Modern Life, which was basically Nickelodeon's graduate school for weird comedy. And after the show ended, Hillenburg pitched something that sounded insane on paper. Okay, it's about a sponge who works at a burger place under the sea, and his best friend is a starfish who is unemployed and dumb by choice. Executives should have thrown him out the window. Instead, they said, yeah, actually, this rules. And yeah, it did. SpongeBob premiered in 1999 and it immediately hit kids right in the soul. It wasn't cynical, sarcastic, loud for no reason, gross out, preachy, or moralizing. It was just pure fun, wholesome chaos, earnest goofiness. The kind of joy that feels like jumping off a diving board in June with a Capri Sun waiting on the pool deck. The first episode, The Anchovies Rush, set the tone. SpongeBob never gives up, never gets bitter, never stops believing the world is good. He was the anti-Ren and Stimpy. He was the anti-Invader Zim. He wasn't parody. He wasn't edgy. He wasn't trying to push boundaries. He was just kind. And Nickelodeon suddenly realized they had something more powerful than weirdness. A hero every kid instantly loved. And every SpongeBob fan knows the first 3 seasons are sacred text. This was the Hillenburg era, the hand-drawn era, the era where every episode felt like a short comedy film. We got Band Geeks, Chocolate with Nuts, the Hash-Slinging Slasher, Rock Bottom, Frankendoodle, the Camping Episode, Pizza Delivery, Something Smells, Sailor Mouth, Club SpongeBob, Dying for Pie. This run is absolutely untouchable. Every episode is quotable. Every single joke lands. Every facial expression belongs on a t-shirt. We didn't just watch SpongeBob. We memorized him. We spoke SpongeBob. We still speak SpongeBob. You can walk into any office in America and shout, Krusty Krab, yeah, pizza. And at least 3 grown adults will respond. SpongeBob wasn't just a show. It was our second language. SpongeBob hit the perfect sweet spot. Rocko's clever wit, Ren and Stimpy's expressive animation, KaBlam's elastic sense of possibility, Hey Arnold's emotional sincerity, and Hillenburg's ocean brain magic. It was bright, simple, deep, silly, human, surreal, and endlessly creative. It appealed to toddlers, teens, college kids, parents. It appealed to everybody. Nickelodeon didn't just have a hit. They had lightning in a bottle. And then they did what any giant media company would do. They tried to keep the lightning forever. In 2004, Hillenburg and the original team made the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, a project intended to be the show's finale. Let me say that again. SpongeBob was supposed to end in 2004. Hillenburg wanted to go out at the top. He believed in telling a complete story, not dragging something out past its prime. Nickelodeon did not agree with him. The movie made money, a lot of money. And Viacom looked at the money and said, "Buddy, you think we're stopping this train? Absolutely not." Hillenburg stepped down. Most of the original staff left with him. The show continued on. And this, right here, this is the pivot. The moment SpongeBob stopped being a show and became a product. After season 3, SpongeBob's tone changed. Episodes became louder, more aggressive, more chaotic, less heartfelt, more exaggerated, more meme bait, flattering character. And not because the news staff was bad, no. They were incredibly talented, but they were working under a totally different mandate. SpongeBob is the face of Nickelodeon now. Make him bigger, make him constant, make him forever. SpongeBob reruns dominated airtime. New shows struggled to find room to breathe. Some got one season, some got half. Nickelodeon had discovered it was easier to rely on an unstoppable juggernaut than cultivate new weirdness. And in that moment, something quietly died. Not SpongeBob, no, he was thriving. But the ecosystem around him, the variety, the risk-taking, the willingness to get strange, the spirit of the 90s, it absolutely died. Let me be blunt. SpongeBob saved Nickelodeon, but Nickelodeon then used SpongeBob to avoid evolving. It became the network's Marvel, its Batman, its Mickey Mouse. By the mid-2000s, the schedule looked like this. SpongeBob, Fairly Odd Parents, SpongeBob, Jimmy Neutron, more SpongeBob, maybe an episode of Danny Phantom if the stars aligned. SpongeBob until you pass out. And every time a new cartoon tried to break through, it drowned in pineapple-flavored airtime. My Life as a Teenage Robot, Cat Scratch, El Tigre, Tack and the Power of Juju, Fanboy and Chum Chum, Robot and Monster, whatever the hell the X's was. Some good, some weird, some ahead of their time, but none of them stood a chance. Nickelodeon was not a network anymore. It was the SpongeBob channel featuring occasional guest shows. And after years away, Steven Hillenburg quietly returned as a creative advisor in the early 2010s. And something changed. The writing sharpened. The jokes found rhythm again. The animation regained elasticity. The spirit, some of it came back. The crew often said it felt like Dad came home. Hillenburg didn't retake the throne, but he gently steered the ship back to its roots. He brought heart back into Bikini Bottom. He reminded the world that SpongeBob wasn't just a meme factory. He was a character with depth, innocence, and emotional honesty. And then, in 2018, Steven Hillenburg passed away from ALS. It hit the entire animation world like a kick to the gut. And Nickelodeon, to their credit, honored him beautifully. Because whatever came before or after, SpongeBob is his. The optimism, the kindness, the weirdness, the heart, that was all Hillenburg. So here's the truth, unfiltered. The good, SpongeBob became a cultural icon. Memes kept him eternally relevant. Kids and adults both love him. Merch sales kept Nickelodeon alive. His optimism became generational. Bikini Bottom is one of the best built animated worlds ever. And the bad? Nickelodeon leaned too hard into him. Other shows suffocated. The network stopped taking big risks. SpongeBob reruns dominated airtime for over a decade. The weird, varied spirit of 90s Nickelodeon faded. Corporate decisions overshadowed creative choices. And the eternal? SpongeBob became the symbol of Nickelodeon, for better and for worse. He is the torch that carried the network forward, and the crutch that kept it from evolving. You know, It's easy to look back on Nickelodeon with nothing but warm fuzzies. And honestly, it deserves a lot of our nostalgia because it shaped an entire generation. It entertained millions and it built childhoods. But anything that big, anything that influential, casts a shadow. And Nickelodeon's shadow is long. Because behind the slime, behind the laughter, behind the brightest kids network on the planet, there were stories that weren't being told. Stories that didn't fit the brand. Stories of burnout, pressure, manipulation, and in some cases, far, far worse. This part of our episode isn't about ruining our nostalgia, but it is about respecting the real people who were part of this era. The kids whose faces we saw each and every week. The writers, artists, and actors who were crushed under impossible workloads. The people who were hurt and the people who hurt them. So we're going to talk about the toxic showrunners, the mistreatment, the child star fallout, the predators in plain sight, the corporate failures, the cultural blind spots, and how Nickelodeon tried and often failed to protect the vulnerable. Nickelodeon was built on the backs of child performers. And here's the hard truth no one likes to talk about. Hollywood has never been designed with child safety in mind. Nickelodeon didn't invent the problem, no, but they absolutely participated in it. Kids like Amanda Bynes, Kenan Thompson, Kel Mitchell, Drake Bell, Miranda Cosgrove, Josh Peck, and Jamie Lynn Spears. They were household names before they were old enough to drive. They had scheduling, scripts, studio days, rehearsals, live tapings, press tours, brand obligations. Meanwhile, their peers were at home trying to keep Tamagotchis alive just like all of us. The pressure was enormous. The expectations were unrealistic. And the adults in charge? Many were doing their best, but some were not. Kids burned out early. Some spiraled. Some disappeared. Some are still dealing with the trauma. And one of the darkest threads running through all of that, well, let's go straight into the center of the storm. Dan Schneider. The man who shaped all that, The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, Zoe 101, iCarly, Victorious. He was the face behind Nickelodeon's second golden age of live-action programming. Kids adored his shows, but behind the scenes, there were red flags waving so violently it's a miracle the studio wallpaper didn't peel off. Accounts from former actors, writers, and crew members paint a picture of a man who was verbally abusive, explosive, bullying towards staff, manipulative, controlling, obsessed with young actresses, creating uncomfortable hypersexualized scenes, and wielding far, far too much power. And Nickelodeon let it happen. Why? Because the shows were hits, because he made money, because institutions love success more than accountability. The foot joke discourse that fans laughed about online, turns out, wasn't really a joke. Patterns were there. People spoke up, quietly, but the machine kept rolling. Until 2018, when Nickelodeon finally cut ties. No official reason given, but the writing on the wall was miles wide. Schneider was not charged with crimes, and that distinction does matter. But the behavior, the patterns, the stories from those who worked with him, it paints a clear, disturbing picture. And this isn't just about one man. It's about a system that let a man like that hold that much power for that long. And look, this is the part I cannot sugarcoat. This is the part of the Nickelodeon story that hits the absolute hardest. And it should hit this hard. Because Drake Bell, who so many of us grew up watching on The Amanda Show, and Drake and Josh, wasn't just a child actor navigating fame, pressure, and a brutal work schedule. He was a child being groomed, manipulated, and abused by an adult who should have protected him. Drake Bell has since publicly come forward and confirmed what many people suspected for years. He was abused, repeatedly, by Brian Peck, an acting coach and dialogue instructor who worked with kids across the industry, including Nickelodeon sets. And I want to be really fucking clear. This was not a scandal. This was a fucking crime. A crime committed against a child. Peck was charged in 2004 and served time. But the system and the industry protected him more than it protected his victims. Drake was a kid who should have been safe, a kid surrounded by adults whose one job was to safeguard him, a kid in an environment where success was celebrated louder than safety. And Nickelodeon, they didn't tell the cast. They didn't warn parents. They didn't intervene until after the damage was already done. They continued employing people connected to Peck long after he was convicted. Drake Bell didn't even receive proper support when the truth surfaced. He carried this alone for decades. He only felt safe enough to tell the full story in the 2023 Quiet on Set documentary. A documentary he didn't just appear in, he broke open the dam. Because hearing him describe that trauma, hearing him talk about how alone he felt, how confused he was, how the adults around him failed so completely, it's heartbreaking. It's enraging. And it's absolutely necessary to talk about if we're telling an honest story of Nickelodeon. Drake wasn't a celebrity who had a rough time. He was a child victim in a system that did not protect him. And the fallout shaped his whole life, his mental health, his decisions, his self-image, his future. And that doesn't excuse the mistakes he made as an adult. And he's owned those mistakes. But those mistakes also did not come out of nowhere. You see, trauma isn't a one-time event. It's a ripple that hits everything that comes after. And Nickelodeon, like so many Hollywood institutions, has to reckon with that. Not privately, not silently, publicly, transparently, and with accountability. Because kids are not props. Kids aren't products. Kids aren't ratings. Kids are human beings who deserve to be safe. Drake Bell deserved that. Every child on those sets deserved that. And far too many never got it. And while we're here, we need to talk about Amanda Bynes. Because Amanda Bynes didn't just become famous on Nickelodeon. She was Nickelodeon. At 10 years old, she was carrying sketches, characters, cold opens, audience energy, essentially the weight of a weekly variety show. And then the Amanda Show hit, and she went from rising star to full-blown icon. But Amanda didn't get a childhood. She got scripts, rewrites, rehearsals, pressure, the Schneider production ecosystem, and the burden of being the funny one. She was a kid performing at an adult level with none of the emotional scaffolding adult performers rely on. Her struggles later in life are absolutely not funny. They aren't gossip. They are predictable consequences of a system that pushes children beyond what children are built to withstand. Nickelodeon made her famous. Hollywood made her fragile. And society made her a fucking spectacle. She deserved, and still deserves, compassion. And in 2007, Jamie Lynn Spears, star of Zoey 101, announced she was pregnant at 16. Nickelodeon panicked. This was the face of their biggest tween show. They released careful statements. PR went into overdrive. Rumors flew about cancellations, scripts being rewritten, staff being blindsided. But here's the hard truth. Jamie Lynn was a kid. A kid working an adult job. A kid under extraordinary pressure. A kid enduring a situation millions of girls quietly endure. And instead of asking, how do we support her? The world asked, how could this happen to our network star? It showed how deeply twisted the child star ecosystem had become. This part of the story is not fun. It isn't nostalgic, and it isn't pretty. But it is the fucking truth. And if we're going to celebrate Nickelodeon's golden era, we also have to confront the costs, especially for the kids who gave that era so much of its magic. And let's roll back to the 90s. You know, the era of Double Dare, Guts, and Legends of the Hidden Temple. These were dream shows for a lot of kids. But they were also physically demanding obstacle courses supervised by producers, not child safety experts. Kids got scraped, bruised, frightened, pushed too hard, medically overlooked. Some families even reported unfulfilled prizes and chaotic, unprofessional environments. Was Nickelodeon trying to hurt anyone? No, I really don't think so. But they were learning safety standards on the fly, with real kids as the guinea pigs. And behind every cartoon we loved, there were teams of overstretched artists and exhausted writers. Nickelodeon's fast, cheap, repeatable model crushed creativity. Shows were canceled not because they were bad, but because they didn't sell toys. My Life as a Teenage Robot, El Tigre, Cat Scratch, Robot and Monster, The X's, Chalk Zone, Tack and the Power of Juju. Creators talked about burnout. Executives demanded more SpongeBob energy. Innovation died so merchandising could live. If you add it all up, what do you get? A network that, yes, gave us joy. But on the flip side, a network that caused a lot of real pain. A brand that shaped our childhood. And a system that failed very real children. Nickelodeon isn't just slime and laughter and heyday nostalgia. It's choices. Good choices and bad choices. And the consequences that followed. And if we're going to honor Nickelodeon honestly, we do not skip the hard parts. We carry all of it because the people behind the scenes, especially those kids, deserve the truth. All right, before we move into the finale, the legacy, the lessons, and the future, I want to take a quick breath because Nickelodeon wasn't just SNICK. It wasn't just Nicktoons, it wasn't just game shows, or the controversies, or the weird experimental fever dreams. Nickelodeon had another side, a softer, gentler, early morning Saturday side. A side full of singing frogs, talking castles, animated bears, and a smiling face that introduced himself like he owned the whole network. So let's consider this a palate cleanser to move away from all the dark stuff we just covered. A warm-up hug. A bonus act dedicated to the shows that tucked us in before school. The hosts who taught us kindness. And the mascots who lived between the shows in that magical liminal space where cartoons faded out and our childhood faded in. This is the world of Nick Jr., Face, and Stick Stickly, the babysitters of all of us 90s kids. Nick Jr. launched in 1988, but for us, the 90s kids, it exploded in the early and mid-90s. Nick Jr. wasn't loud like the rest of Nickelodeon. It was calm, gentle. It spoke to kids like they were, well, kids. Not tiny adults, not ratings targets. Shows like Blue's Clues, Little Bear, Gullah Gullah Island, Eureka's Castle, Allegra's Window, Franklin. They weren't just entertainment. They were comfort. Blue's Clues taught problem solving without overstimulation. Little Bear gave us cozy woodland tranquility. Gullah Gullah Island celebrated warmth, culture, and community. Eureka's Castle was puppet-based magic before puppet-based magic became a genre. Nick Jr. felt like the softer sibling who let you sit on the couch with a blanket and learn something without realizing you were learning anything. And the best part? It respected kids. It never shouted at them. It didn't talk down to them. It created space for imagination to breathe. Which brings me to the king of gentle energy. Face. Just face. A pair of eyes, a mouth, a background that changed colors like a mood ring, and a voice that could disarm even the crankiest toddler. Hi there, Face here. Buddy, when that line hit, you knew exactly what kind of morning you were about to have. Face wasn't a character. Face was your friend, a buddy, a sugar rush serotonin pellet injected straight into the viewer's forehead. He narrated transitions. He explained lineups. He made silly sounds like he changed expressions like a Looney Tune. He was whimsical without ever being overwhelming. Face was the gold standard of early childhood hosting. Calm, patient, silly, warm, never condescending. And best of all, he didn't exist to sell any toys. He existed to make kids feel safe. That's rare, man. And that's beautiful. Now, on the other end of the day, in the after-school slot, Nickelodeon unleashed an icon, a legend, a popsicle stick with googly eyes and a narrator who sounded like your cool uncle. Stick Stickly. Stick Stickly was pure, distilled Nickelodeon energy. He was weird, DIY, low budget as hell, charming as all get out, self-aware, silly, and absolutely beloved. And of course, write to me, Stick Stickly, P.O. Box 963, New York City, New York State 10108. That jingle lives rent-free in all of our skulls and will stay there forever. Stick Stickly handled viewer mail, programming blocks, summer specials, sarcastic commentary, and the vibe of a substitute teacher you actually enjoyed. He was hosted by Paul Christie, who absolutely crushed the voice performance. A magic blend of goofy and sincere. Stick Stickly felt like the entire network saying, yeah, dude, we're weird. We know we're weird. And we're going to lean into the weird. He was a mascot that cost roughly 27 cents and 2 googly eyes. And he outperformed million-dollar mascots on other networks. That's Nickelodeon in a nutshell. Face and Stick Stickly weren't shows. They weren't scripted sitcoms. They weren't animated epics. They were the glue, the connective tissue, the vibe setters. They transformed Nickelodeon from a collection of programs into a 24/7 clubhouse. Face set the tone for the day. Stick Stickly wrapped it up with personality. They made Nickelodeon feel alive, like a friend you visited, not a channel you watched. And all of this matters, especially in an episode where we're dissecting the network's corporate shifts and controversies, because these characters stand as reminders of what Nickelodeon got right. They cared about the viewer experience. They created a sense of belonging, and they made kids feel seen. Even without toys, even without loud colors, even without giant budgets. And sometimes all a kid needs is a smiling face or a talking popsicle stick to feel connected. Nick Jr., Face, Stick Stickly, the morning softness and the after-school weirdness that shaped our earliest memories. Now that we've honored both sides of the network, the bright and the dark, the chaotic and the gentle, we're ready to close this thing out. All right, guys. We've climbed the aggro crag, we've been slimed, we've survived Zim's doom, KaBlam's experimental chaos, SpongeBob's takeover, and the hard truths of what went wrong behind the scenes. We've looked at Nickelodeon the way you look at your childhood home when you're grown, with love, nostalgia, and clarity. But now comes the big question. What is Nickelodeon's legacy? What do we, as adults, take from all of this? And what does the future of kids' media look like because of it? So let's bring it home. Before anything else, Nickelodeon's greatest legacy is joy. Full stop. Pure, unfiltered joy. It gave us slime, SNICK nights, Saturday morning cartoons, game shows that felt achievable, Nicktoons that became our coping mechanisms, characters who felt like our best friends, and weirdo hosts who popped up between shows just to make you smile. Nickelodeon wasn't just a TV channel. It was a space, a clubhouse, a place where weird kids, shy kids, anxious kids, artsy kids, loud kids, funny kids could all see themselves. It told us it was okay to be messy. It was okay to be loud, to be strange, to be imaginative, to be flawed. Nickelodeon's best shows didn't teach us how to behave. They taught us how to be. Be creative. Be fearless. Be curious. Be emotionally honest. Be your weird, authentic self. And you know what? That stays with you. Nickelodeon's legacy is also complicated because nostalgia doesn't erase failure. There were systems that failed, adults who failed, a corporation that valued output over safety, talent over protection, and revenue over responsibility. We have to honor the kids and adults who were hurt by those failures. Drake Bell, Amanda Bynes, the kids pushed too hard on game shows, the actresses objectified by writers, the staffers abused by toxic bosses, the creators overworked to exhaustion. Their pain is part of Nickelodeon's story, not the part we loved, but the part we have to acknowledge if we truly care about what Nickelodeon meant and means. Because nostalgia without accountability, that's not love. That's denial. And denial is how systems break people. So the legacy of Nickelodeon is both the magic Nickelodeon created and the people it failed along the way. We can and must hold both truths. Nickelodeon believed kids were smart. Let me say that again. Nickelodeon believed kids were smart. Are You Afraid of the Dark gave us fear. Hey Arnold gave us empathy. Rocko gave us satire. Doug gave us emotional vulnerability. Rugrats gave us wonder. Pete and Pete gave us surrealism. Zim gave us existentialism. SpongeBob gave us optimism. Nick Jr. gave us comfort and imagination. Nickelodeon didn't explain the world to kids. It just let kids explain themselves. That ethos matters more now than ever. Kids today are drowning in content, but how much of it actually respects them? How much trusts them? How much sees them as more than data points? Nickelodeon, at its best, set the bar. And it is a bar absolutely worth remembering. If Nickelodeon's golden age taught us what kids' media can be, its controversies taught us what kids' media must never be again. We learned child stars need real safeguards. Work environments need transparency. Adults in power must be held accountable immediately. Success cannot justify harm. Kids deserve protection above profit. Creative workplaces must protect both creators and performers. Companies need ethics that extend beyond brand management. Nickelodeon stumbled hard, but from those stumbles came real change. Hollywood now has stronger child welfare advocates. Parents are more aware. Audiences speak up louder. Documentaries like Quiet on Set force accountability. Survivors like Drake Bell are finally being heard. Progress is not perfect, but it is happening because people cared enough to listen and speak. Kids today don't want sanitized content. They don't want algorithm sludge. They want authenticity, humor, variety, weirdness, heart, creativity, and safety behind the scenes. Basically, kids today want what we had, minus the exploitation. And the good news? We're seeing creators rise up with shows like Bluey, Adventure Time, The Owl House, Steven Universe, Craig of the Creek, Gravity Falls. Programs that blend creativity with emotional intelligence. Programs where the people making them don't have to suffer for their art. Nickelodeon, the good Nickelodeon, walked so these shows could run. It showed the whole world kids aren't dumb, kids aren't fragile, kids deserve incredible storytelling and responsible production. That is the legacy that matters. Nickelodeon was our upbringing in 30-minute increments. It shaped us 90s kids' humor, hearts, our friendships, our imaginations, our language, and our pop culture DNA. Even now, decades later, we still quote SpongeBob. We hum the SNICK theme. We remember Face. We can still see the Guts leaderboard. We can still hear Stick Stickley's address. And when life gets messy, chaotic, surreal, or stressful, sometimes our brain pulls a Nick moment from deep storage and goes, hey, you survived childhood. You've got this. That's the power of the orange splat. It marked us. It stained us in the best way possible. And at its best, Nickelodeon taught us be messy, be weird, be loud, be creative, be emotional, be thoughtful, be yourself. And at its worst, it taught us what happens when systems forget that kids are human beings and not products. And the future of kids' media, if it's going to be worthy of the next generation, must carry both lessons forward. So no, Nickelodeon wasn't perfect, but it was foundational. It made us, it shaped us, it held us, and yes, it hurt some of us, but it inspired all of us. Nickelodeon wasn't just a channel. Nickelodeon was a generation. It was an identity. It was a clubhouse with a door wide open. And at the end of the day, Nickelodeon was us. And that, everybody, is Nickelodeon. The good, the bad, the weird, the joyful, the messy, the magical, and the parts that were damn hard to talk about. But if we're going to do nostalgia, we're going to do it honestly. Because Nickelodeon didn't just give us cartoons and game shows. It gave us identity, community. It gave us the language we still speak in memes and quotes today. It taught us courage, creativity, chaos, kindness, and yeah, it taught us a few hard lessons too. We grew up with this network. Some of us grew because of it. And even when we outgrew it, it never really left us. It's in the jokes we tell, the friendships we formed, the comfort shows we still watch, the attitude we bring to the world. Nickelodeon wasn't perfect, but damn if it didn't help shape who we became. So whether you were a SNICK kid, a Nick Jr. kid, a Nicktoons kid, a Guts and Legends of the Hidden Temple kid, or a SpongeBob for Life kid, or all of the above, this episode's for you. Thank you for stepping back into that orange glow with me. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being part of this little clubhouse we're building right here, week after week, on the Average Joe Nerdcast. Shout out to my player 2. The one who still loves me even when I ramble about cartoons at 2 o'clock in the morning. You keep my world colorful. Definitely way brighter than any Nickelodeon orange. Shout out to Cab. You might have missed the 90s, brother, but you would have fit right in. You are, and always will be, the first one in my party lineup. And shout out to my brother Ian for always holding down the fort, keeping me grounded, keeping me honest, and always the first person I'm going to call before I scale the aggro crag. And shout out to Pickle, who is absolutely banned from the Hidden Temple for trying to smuggle out a talking statue and yelling, "I did it for the lore!" God damn you, you chaotic little gremlin. Please never change. And shout out to Noah, the first official member of the Average Joe Nerdcast Street Team. And as always, to my girl Ripley, my Bippy, may she forever guard the orange couch in the great big clubhouse of the beyond. And to you, listening right now, you are the slime in my bucket, the stick in my stick stickly, and the aggro in my crag. Every time you tune in, share an episode, leave a review, or send a memory, you make this thing real. You are the Midnight Society of this whole operation. So thank you. Seriously, thank you. So if you grew up in the golden age of Nickelodeon, if you've got memories, stories, favorite shows, lost episodes, weird childhood theories, or anything I forgot to cover here, please send them in. Drop them to me on socials, email them, shout them into the void, or send a carrier pigeon. I want it all. And hey, if you enjoyed today's Nostalgia Deep Dive, hit follow, leave a review, and share it with a friend who still remembers Stick Stickly's mailing address by heart. It helps more than you know. All right, everybody. We're at the end. The slime buckets are empty, and the orange couch has been powered off. So until next time, stay gold, nerd bold, stay weird, stay nostalgic, and remember, the silver monkey statue goes base, body, head. Come on, Chad. It's not that hard. I'll catch you on the next one.
Game over.